So again, welcome. My name is Jonathan Harwell Dye. I am the Director of Programs for the Arts and Business Council of Greater Nashville. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that leverages and unites the unique resources of the arts and business communities to create a thriving, sustainable, creative culture in Nashville. We do this by providing education, resources, and opportunities to the creative community while connecting the business community to the arts to foster workplace creativity and innovation. When you become a member of the Arts and Business Council, you join artists, art organizations, and leading Nashville area businesses in cultivating our creative community. ABC's fiscal sponsorship program supports independent filmmakers and documentarians by providing philanthropic fundraising resources for projects, including the ability to receive tax-deductible donations from businesses and individuals, as well as grants from government agencies, foundations, trusts, and other entities requiring IRS nonprofit status. Eligible projects must be independent, narrative, or documentary endeavors, with the majority of production occurring in Tennessee, and could include anything from a short to feature films, television, docuseries, web series, podcast, and experimental and immersive media. Finally, the Tennessee Film and Entertainment Webinar Series is generously sponsored by the Tennessee Entertainment Commission. So we're going to watch a short video about the commission and Tennessee's thriving creative industries. But now I'm pleased to introduce J. Chris Wall, a 25-year veteran of kids and family animation and co-founder of Shining Owl Productions, an independent animation studio. Chris is executive producer and showrunner of the Wingfeather Saga animated series, which ranks as the largest animated crowdfunded kids and family project in history, raising $7 million for the first 2 seasons. He spent over a decade producing the VeggieTales direct-to-video series with Big Idea and DreamWorks Animation. That includes the popular Wonderful Wizard of Oz, St. Nicholas, and Noah's Ark. He's also the creator of the puppet mixed media Slugs and Bugs show, with 2 seasons in distribution. Chris is passionate about developing projects with stories of truth and beauty. When not working to bring thoughtful and meaningful art into the world, you can find Chris outside with his wife and kids, deriving creativity and inspiration from the outdoors around Nashville. Chris, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for that intro. Yeah, glad to be with you guys.
Chris, I want to begin today really by talking about your pathway into animation, your work with VeggieTales and DreamWorks, founding your animation studio, the story of Wingfeather Saga and how that show is made, the business and creative aspects of that, as well as talk about the job market for animation and digital visualization careers. And then at the end of it, we'll save a little bit of time for Q&A with the audience as well.
When
So
you
we'll
say
give
it all
folks a
together like
chance.
that, it sounds so condensed, and I'm just like, wow, who's this guy? Like, it was in a very slow series of events to get to that, but sure, yeah.
Absolutely. It does feel, when you look back on it, it feels like a lot, but as it's happening, it's just
Yeah, it just
small
feels like that
pieces,
was a
right?
Tuesday, whatever. So yeah, it's great.
Well, so let's go back to the beginning. Where did it all start for you? Like, where did this career pathway begin for you?
Man, I grew up as a fan of Looney Tunes. Just loved, Bugs Bunny, Wile E. Coyote, and all that. And then during the Disney Renaissance of, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, of course, Little Mermaid, and those, I really fell in love with animation as an art form, and was just a fan, front row popcorn bucket guy, right? And had a production company I was working with in college got the rights to some Max Lucado short stories. And they said, hey, we're going to do this direct-to-video animated project. We need someone to help them, this crew they were putting together, edit. in animation. And I was like, oh, I'd love to try. It's just fresh out of college, so I
Mhm.
stepped in, and then it helped out with voicing the character, and just like kind of grew into it. And I was like, this is awesome. But I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the time, which, like Nashville, is not exactly the epicenter of all things world of animation. And then fast forward 2004, a big idea producing VeggieTales was moving here to Franklin, just south of Nashville, and said, hey, do you want to join us out here? And so our family moved out here in 2004. And that really got me into kind of the deeper part of my career working in animation. So I always had a love for it. Never thought I'd work in it. I'm not an artist by trade.
Mhm.
And I draw a really good Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. That's my best work. But about that, that's about it. And I probably do a Bob and Larry, it's just a oval and a sphere. But anyways, getting into animation the way I have has been really delightful, kind of coming in as a fan of the genre first, a kid at heart. My favorite movies are kids and family movies, so when my buddies in college would go see this new, war movie, I'd be there watching, Space Jam, so that's been my journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. Coming in as a fan, it's a wonderful place to start from, right?
Sure.
So you spent over a decade producing Veggie Tales with Big Idea and DreamWorks Animation. What was that experience like, and what were the lessons that you learned from that are still sticking with you today?
Yeah, I had the wonderful benefit of stepping into that really high level of execution with just an amazing group of talented artists, from composers to script writers to artists that are still here in the Nashville area. It was just a remarkable kind of leveling up coming from somewhat of an independent background into that world, and finding that talent, again here in Nashville. And we were kind of a little island of animation crew working, trying to make this stuff go. And I think I learned so much from the head of studio at the time, a guy named David Pitts, who had this really wonderful lens of efficiency, of finding ways to make productions efficient um, while still high quality and high caliber. And that really was something that I resonated deeply with. I love efficiency, and so, but also I think there's when some people hear that, they think cheap and they think poor craft. And instead, what David championed, what I love to champion, is high quality and high craft, but avoid the pitfalls where you can spend more than you intend to, that doesn't do anything to help your audience enjoy what they're getting into. So it's really sitting in the seat of the audience and saying, what can I do to bring the maximum value to whatever I'm making? If it's a little puppet show, Slugs and Bugs, you mentioned, low budget puppet show here in Nashville, shot over south of the Gulch, and but with Sesame Street level puppeteers, right? So executing at a high craft, but a smaller sandbox. That is something I have loved and was deeply marked by in my time with VeggieTales. Because while it was a big and successful series and globally competitive, it was still on a budget like everybody, and you're finding out ways to do what you do, and really surprise and delight your audience, right, with things that are clever. A lot of people know this, but the vegetables and VeggieTales did not have arms or legs. And so you're always finding ways to surprise the audience. That is a limitation and also an opportunity. And I think in the world of art, and I've learned this living in Nashville so much, it is about the drive of the artist to want to put something into the world. I don't care if you're going to do that at a very simple, give me a guitar on the corner downtown, or at a high level because you're on a TV series. It's the same desire to put something into the world, and don't let that get encumbered by, well, I have to have this much resource or this much team. It's like, what do you have? Now go put into the world. And I love finding different ways to do that among the very different projects I've been a part of, with different kind of budget resource level and that sort of thing.
So, how did that lead into you founding Shining Owl Productions and starting your own animation studio?
Yeah, necessity. So I stepped out in 2015. VeggieTales kind of got to the end of its run. It started in 92, 93, and got to the end of its run. And DreamWorks at that time was like, we're done with that side of our thing. Do you want to move out here to LA and keep producing with us, or do you want to, step off? And I said, I love Nashville and had young kids, and I just want to stay in the market here. And so I was like, well, I'll step out and see if I can't start to develop some of my own projects that I'm excited about. And was immediately met with, I have no idea what I'm doing. And the Arts and Business Council was critical at that point because I was so experienced inside of a large studio, right? And so when you need resource, you turn to the resource who's you're working next to, right? And hey, how do I do
Yeah.
this? And how do I manage this? And they have their level of expertise. Well, suddenly, as an entrepreneur stepping out on your own, you have to do that yourself. And I was very interested in this Wingfeather Saga fantasy book series that I'd read with my kids, gotten to know Andrew, the author, and I said, hey, could we partner together, you and I, to try to develop the series together? I didn't want to option it, but I wanted to just take it and work with him on it. And so we began that and came up with a company name and got an LLC and had to work through all that, figuring out how to set up an LLC in the state of Tennessee, which is frankly very simple once you know the process, and had some very helpful people getting us through that. And then we got underway with, okay, what do we do? And I think you're met with, all right, we have a shingle, we have a name, a little website. Now what? And
Yeah.
that turned for us into crowdfunding. Andrew had done some crowdfunding for the book series as a Nashville resident. He's largely in the singer-songwriter community most of his career, but to do the fourth book in the series, he wanted to do a big hardcover version. Did a very successful Kickstarter, the largest publishing one in its time, over $100,000 to publish a hardcover version of a book, right?
Mhm.
And so he said, I think we go back to the crowd. And that was the beginning. So as we went into 2016. And I was like, man, I don't know if a crowd's going to show up, on a Kickstarter for a short film, an animated short film of a book they hopefully have read, right? It just seemed like too, but we went for it, and it was, again, very successful. We earned, I think, $265,000 over the course of that Kickstarter campaign, and use that as, okay, now we know what we're going to do. We're going to make a little proof of concept, a little test to see if that's what we want to make the series out of. And so, again, I think that relationship with your fans, your crowd, the people around you has been a really key part. It was a part of EduTel's journey, that they were such a big engagement of their fans and keeping them involved. I think we see more and more across the entertainment industry that there's these interesting lanes of people who develop a following, develop an audience, curate them. You see this certainly in music, right? That you've got to build your people so that then when you have the opportunity, you're the overnight success, but because you've been working the trenches for a long time, and I certainly got to experience that coming alongside with Andrew and Wingfeather.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was mentioning our Periscope program earlier, and that's one of the things that we talk about is how do you build that community around your work that will support you, and how do you know how to do that and put in that legwork, because you're right, it seems like an overnight success, but there's a lot of work that goes in before that, and a lot of reaching an audience, building community with an audience, and that relationship with the audience. I'm curious how you went from, so kind of like you did the proof of concept. What happened after that? How did you take it out into the world beyond that initial Kickstarter?
Well, we spent another 5, almost 6 years to be an overnight success. That was definitely the hard season. We ended up we raised the money to do that short film, and I thought, okay, we got this short film in hand. Well, this is going to close the deal. Going to get this done. I'd already been at Netflix and Amazon and places. We're going to take this back, and they're going to see this, and they're going to go like, here's all the money, right? That did not happen. And instead, we showed them these things, and they were like, we love this. This is so cool, but we have something similar in our pipeline, or we're not sure this is the thing we want to go forward with next. Just all that sort of thing, which I'd been told at the front end, be ready for a 5 to 6 year journey in developing. It just takes a long time, especially independent. And I was like, nah, this is going to go way faster. And it did not. I think I mentioned this to you, Jonathan, but our family really loved the Barbie movie. And recognizing, as you read about it after the fact, that Greta and Margot Robbie, Margot spent 6 years trying to get that thing made. Margot Robbie was not able to get the Barbie movie made for 6 years. So who do you think you are, right? I mean, you kind of just step back and go, okay, this may take a minute, especially if you're making something interesting and distinct and unique in the marketplace. If you're saying, well, there's been a run of this kind of entertainment and I'm just going to do the next version of that, you probably go quicker. If you're trying to do something that's actually something that's a little new, expect it to take longer. And I wasn't ready for that part of it, but here we went. In 2020, was introduced to Angel Studios. They had developed this really interesting pipeline of using crowdfunded stuff to make, television and movies. And so we started talking to those guys, like, well, would you distribute Wingfeather? Like, that's kind of their thing. They just are basically kind of distributors and marketers. And they looked at the project, and eventually, in the beginning of 21, said, yeah, we'll distribute. You guys have to go raise your money, but we'll distribute. So on the back of having a distribution agreement, you can say, okay, now we want to raise this money. That was also a crowd-funded initiative, which we did not expect. So during I think the Jobs Act of, I got to look at this again. I keep forgetting the date, but I think it's 2018, created this idea for people to buy shares in a small business. So, I've got, Bob's coffee shop down the road, let's say, and he needs to raise $1 million. He can go get a loan from a bank. That could require certain capital, could be challenging from a business structure. This crowdfunding mechanism, which is with the Security Exchange Commission of the United States, allows you to register your LLC with the SEC and sell shares in your company. You set up an operating agreement and how it's all going to work. See how fast we got into legal stuff? Okay, so
Yeah.
and you tell them, I'm going to sell bricks in my company, and if people buy them, they're not tradable. They can't go to trade them on the stock exchange, but they kind of are vested and they have some value to them, so that as the business becomes profitable, then they can earn some revenue back or that sort of thing. So we set that up and opened our doors in May of 21 with one of the registered portals across the U.S. They have a percentage. I think it's about 5% they charge to carry, Wingfeather here in town or others. And then you list and say, hey, do you guys want to buy shares in our company? And in our case, we weren't making a coffee shop, we're making an animated TV series. And we were blown away to see the response from fans and supporters that said, we love this idea. And we sold $1 million in shares in 48 hours. And I was on a backpack trip with my scouts. I'm the scoutmaster of our local troop here. I was on a backpack trip in East Tennessee, enjoying the arches out there, and got this note: we'd sold $1 million. I was like, what? No way. So anyways, 20 days into it, we sold out $5 million. You're allowed to raise now $5 million annually, 12 months. And it was okay. Well, we got this, and it was just that simple. Like when it got down to it, it was just that simple. And suddenly we had the resource. Now we were like, okay, we need a team. And now we got to figure out how to make this show in our little startup business. We had the pictures of all the Silicon Valley startups, Amazon, and Pixar and, Apple, all the little garages. Here in Tennessee, garages sometimes a little cold. So we did it in our bonus room of our home in South Franklin. And I had 6 or 8 employees come every day, morning, Mr. Wall, and come on up to the bonus room, and we got underway. And, figured out how to make an animated series that debuted in end of 22. So, yeah.
Amazing. So from your bonus room to where you are today, one of the things that we talked about, and I think this is a great time to talk about this, and kind of harkens back to your experience working with David Pitts, is that you have a really innovative and unique approach to animation using Unreal Engine. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. It sounds like that was very much informed by that time and his influence, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Very much. Yeah. So I think that there's an independent film, animation, other places, there's this idea of trying to sell a Kia positioned as a Mercedes, right? That like, look at this Kia. It does everything that this Mercedes does. What are you doing? Like, no, Mercedes is Mercedes. Don't try to compete. And I knew from our time, of course, at DreamWorks and of course, we see all the big titans of Disney and Pixar and these guys, Sony, that are doing incredible work with millions of dollars of infrastructure. They're loaded with patents internally because they got really smart people. To try to go head to head, you can dream of a David and Goliath story, but it's probably not how it's going to work. You need to think of how to do it differently, right? I don't want to try to do the same thing they're doing, but harder. Like that doesn't work. Like I can do it better than they can. That's just foolish. Instead, it's what tools could I use to accomplish a different outcome, right? Entertain the audience in the same way, but do it in a different way. And that led to this really wonderful moment we were experiencing that started really back in about 2016, where Unreal Engine was available for free. People could download it and start to use it to make narrative stuff. And their trick was, and if it works and you want to make a video game, then we'll charge you, because you can use those assets in video game. And so in 21, there was an opportunity for us to take some of the stuff we had developed during the short film with Maya and so forth, which we did in town here with Magnetic Dreams. They've now become Armada content. But we did all that in Maya, and it was very hard, and ended with, we can't actually make that at scale. Like, it was a great short film, no way to make it in a television series. Okay, so that's not going to work. What are we going to do? So Unreal Engine had just started, and we said, well, here's a new tool that just does things differently. Could we use it? And so we had some really wonderful people who helped us from the gaming industry to move our stuff into Unreal, and that started us off and allowed us to have. Then you think about your capital deployment to build an animation studio, right? So again, our wonderful competitors at the big studios, millions of dollars of infrastructure, servers, and all the things. We could build out literally with Best Buy, Cool Springs, $1,200 gaming laptops. And that's what literally what we started buying for the team. Okay, here, use this. And we could make this animated series using that engine and just a very simple tool set. So similar to, I'm old, but in the 90s when we had DV video, right, that kind of unlocked for filmmakers to be able to make little digital video cameras. Same things happened now where those tools are available. We saw the animated feature Flow last year that was used Blender, which is open source, to do a feature film, right? So the tools, the democratization of these tools happened at the same time, and Unreal for us was kind of the big unlock that allowed us to make our little studio.
So in comparison, if you were trying to make the show in a more traditional way, what would be the difference cost wise, like on in terms of scale?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think about moving one of two levers. And so let's assume that the cost was, let's say that we did raise the same, $5 million in that season one. If we are using a different tool, the quality of the product would go down, right? Like you move one of the two dials. Like if you could shift one, not the other. So the quality of the finished product would feel more like a small independent studio, where at the moment it feels bigger than when you realize it's coming from such a small studio. It's like, wow, that is incredible. Does it look like the latest from Sony or Pixar, those guys? No, we're still a very different machine, but it's competitive. It's in the ballpark, right? And I think that's in animation we do a lot of budgeting of price per finished minute, right? And so the competitors in the feature side are at least $1 million per finished minute, but usually a bit more. And so then you move down to like The Simpsons, kind of 2D stuff, and you're down in the like $50,000, $100,000 per finished minute. Like it's just a very different price point for what it costs. And that's the human labor of animating, right? Is kind of your biggest labor cost. We think about it before, but pre-production is relatively inexpensive, in animation, because you're doing storyboards, animatics, scripting, that sort of thing, relatively inexpensive. And then the animation portion is your bell curve of a lot of expense. And then as you go to post-production, it becomes less expensive as you move to scoring and kind of mixing and so forth.
So we had talked when we spoke before this panel, we talked a little bit about your pipeline and how that was more stable for careers for animators and folks that are working in your studio because of your approach to that. Could you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how this process and the tools you're using feed into that more stable pipeline, if you will?
Yeah, and I see Giselle on here, but the Tennessee Film Commission has learned this too. But because they've been so great at supporting our show, but we have longer employment cycles than a lot of the feature films that come to town, right? So the feature films may spend 20, 30, at most 60 days in principal photography, and then it's done, right? And then it's a very small crew. We're about an 18-month production cycle, and so we get to really hold those people on longer. Now, the other trick we deployed that was really key, and Unreal Engine was one of the enablers here too, is hiring multidisciplinarian. So in a large studio, you need a single disciplinary. I do one thing, I'm one cog in quite a large machine. But and you could say, well, I do something else. Doesn't matter. I need you to do this one thing. And so there's a lot of gained skill and expertise in one thing only. At our studio, what's more valuable is for you to be able to do multiple things because I can employ you longer. So imagine building a house. It's very much what animation is like. And so you can say, well, I am brilliant at pouring concrete in a foundation and building rebar structures. Okay, great. How's your drywall work? Oh, I'm actually quite good at drywall. Okay, wonderful. Because I'm going to be able to retain you through, right? And you're going to do this part of production. And then as we move to this phase, you can also do this one. You may not be the best in your field at this thing, but you're a good journeyman who can do pretty good at these things, and we can train you up to kind of help you to move across those. That became where we were able to hire on a lot of local talent out of some of the amazing universities here in Tennessee and be able to employ them in a longer horizon, which the Film Commission is glad to highlight for the state, to continue to fund grants in this digital area.
Absolutely. So the season 3 of the Wingfeather saga debuts next month, if I'm correct.
To
What
be
are you most?
clear,
Yes, go ahead.
Jonathan, it
Yes.
debuts in 7 or 8 days at the Caverns in Pelham. We're doing an underground in-person premiere. We sold the event out, 850 people, I think maybe a few more. Underground in a cave. It's going to be a blast. That's where
Oh,
we're doing
that's
the
amazing.
in-person premiere. And then, yes, it starts streaming November 12th with Angel. So, yeah.
So what are you most excited about with the 3rd season?
The Caverns. No.
I mean, I get that.
So great. I think our level of scope, the story has a natural kind of growth. It's very similar to Lord of the Rings, where you kind of start in a shire and you build up. I think season 3 is kind of our Helm's Deep, if you will, in the Lord of the Rings vernacular, where we really get to expand the world and the scope of what the story is doing. I think people that may have watched early on are like, oh, it's a cute little show about some kids living on a farm. It just kind of feels small, and that's because you're at the Shire. And now we're headed into Mordor. Like it's actually happening, and it's very intense. And I think we've known that's coming, but to finally be able to show the audience that that's happened, and then just the leveling up of what our crew's been able to do in Unreal Engine as we've really deployed that whole pipeline fully this season is remarkable. I can't wait for people to see it.
That's exciting. That's exciting. And where are you in the development process for the future seasons? What's that look like?
Thankfully, so we're set to do, it's a 4-book series. We're set to do it as a 7-season arc to kind of get us to the end of the books. And we are, for the first time in our company's history, in production on 2 seasons at once, which is demanding. Glad to be able to be here with you. This gives me a little bit of a break, but it's very demanding now as we have season 4 in production. So they're doing layout and prepping for animation in season 4 as we've just finished season 3 and season 5. We have scripts, so we'll start that in January in the story department. So yeah, we're running fast now.
Exciting time. So I want to get back to kind of the career pathways part of our discussion.
Yeah.
Kind of getting back to that question, for people like me that are new to the animation field and to the careers, what are the key job types that people should understand that are possible in the current ecosystem?
That's a great question. I think that what you and I spoke about too is this new term of digital visualization. We're starting to see
Yeah.
as a little easier way, because you think of, when I say animation, it's everybody thinks about animating Mickey Mouse, right? It's like a very specific kind of thing, and that's still a thing. But you see anything from commercial work where you're doing, mascots for television ads or digital, to prevising for architects. I just had an email from a friend who is an architect and engineer, and they're needing some CG pre-visualization of a building, right? It could be of a bridge that was destroyed in East Tennessee, right? I mean, there's a number of places. It could be Nissan calling because they need help pre-visiting a car, right? It could be a medical need for one of the health companies here in Nashville that needs, there's a lot of medical use of these sorts of digital tools. And they're all rooted in similar skill sets. So once you kind of know the language of computer graphics, if you will, CG, it can move to different ways. And I think one of the things that we've seen is this rise in kind of linguistic skills of CG in these teens and 20-somethings who've grown up in a world in which softwares like Blender are available, right? They're open source, they can download, and they can work with CG materials freely, right? It's not locked behind some expensive gateway. It's something that them and all their friends can do. And I think that rise has really changed, how we're able to define what a career path is. Which, yes, here in Nashville, we don't do that much in animation entertainment. We've got a growing list of people doing stuff here, which is delightful over the past number of years. But I think that the core knowledge allows people to be able to move from one job that was doing very specific type of maybe character animation over to something else that's maybe a bit more architectural, or maybe medical, and it's a similar skill set. Or they're stepping into live entertainment and they're creating a bunch of things for all the amazing acts that come out of Nashville that need video walls filled behind them, right?
Mhm.
So there's lots of diversity. Fundamentally, it's using computer graphics, computer generated material.
And what schools and colleges in Tennessee are teaching animation and digital visualization?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I could do a staff sample out here. I've got about 20 people sitting outside my office, and majority are from Lipscomb. Lipscomb has a great 2D program. The Bancroft brothers and under Steve Taylor, they've done a great job. My old buddy Mike Naraki from VeggieTales, and then MTSU has a great program locally. Belmont is starting a digital visualization side, really pushed on by their medical needs as well as their film school. So we're working with them a little bit as they're starting that program. ETSU, don't want to miss them. Eastern Tennessee State, they do some great work. And then Southern Advent down in Chattanooga also has a really good program. So they're kind of pocketed throughout the state. And we reach out to them regularly whenever we're looking for new talent to hire. We love to try to find people in Tennessee. Just hired someone Monday who's out East Tennessee. So Tennessee resident, but working remotely for us, which is pretty great.
Nice. That's great. Uh, you mentioned earlier that in your office, being a journeyman, someone who can do a lot of different things, is actually really useful. But the niching down is, kind of the industry standard.
Yeah.
Uh, is that changing across the spectrum with digital visualization, or is that m- more true, less true? What does it look like as this is emerging as a field that kind of crosses into other sectors and out there?
Absolutely. And I'll speak on this, somewhat secondhand because I'm not in those other fields, but I do
Yeah.
get to interact with, thanks to a couple of things we've had here in the state recently with people in those different disciplines. But the live entertainment side absolutely has a real push. It uses some of these tools differently, right? But the base knowledge of how to open and operate inside of whatever that program is are the same. So if you've got a good working knowledge of how to, sculpt or texture or rig inside of Blender, those tools can be used inside of Unreal in very similar ways. And I think that the multidisciplinary part is useful because I need this part of what you do, right? I need you to be a texture artist, or I need you to be someone who can really help me with rigging. I'm having problems there. Or it's just rendering, right? I'm having problems with lighting and rendering. And so I can help there. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't specialize and have something that you're really good at, right? That's
Mhm.
always the thing that maybe is most rewarding financially. But it may mean that you can do this other job, and it won't be quite as rewarding financially, but it pays the bills for those couple of months while you're waiting for the next job where you're more of a specialist. I think that is where we're seeing kind of the best diversity, if that makes sense. Whereas
Yeah.
if they only do one thing and I can only employ you for that one thing, you may have a lot of downtime, and we just don't have enough production here in the state. And it's true that a lot of remote work is available. The decentralization that happened kind of post COVID, that has contracted back quite a bit. So I've heard from more and more colleagues that were working remotely for major studios in different markets across the US who are now saying, no, we want people back in.
Mhm.
And so that opportunity of being in rural Tennessee and some rolling hills and hollers and being able to animate, those jobs are harder to get to now as we're seeing studios kind of pull those back in a little bit.
Makes sense. So I know we're going to do a Q&A later, but one thing I did when we did registration was I had people submit questions when they registered. And so there were a few that I wanted to pull out. One is from, I think, a middle school student. They said, where should a student middle school start to learn animation? What equipment or software should they have? What open source software can they use? I think you mentioned Blender and Unreal Engine, but what else do they need?
Yeah, Blender and Unreal Engine are both freely available to download. Now, caution, Blender is very accessible, and there are loads of YouTube videos on how to use Blender and get started. So lots of good resources there. Unreal Engine is really powerful. It is a developer platform, and so be prepared for crashing, right? In other words, it's meant to be software developed and used in that way, and crashing is part of the game there. If you're an end user used to products that are more stable, Blender might be a better fit for you. But yeah, in middle school, being able to do this, there's lots of other kind of simpler versions of those things that are, iPad apps and these things that will do very similar, where you can begin to sculpt and rig. Those are great. I know that a number of local kind of workshops and as we look at like helping kids to learn to code, and some of those can kind of bridge, kind of the STEM initiatives, if you will, to really speak the language of. It's really being able to understand the language, and it's, my kids have all taken piano, right? They have the basics of that. Are they really skilled at piano? Some are, some aren't, but they know how to speak the language, and they can choose what to do with it. I think in the same world today, speaking some level of code, some level of computer graphic is useful in the marketplace, especially early on, and whether that becomes a hobby for them, or something they want to pursue, it's a great tool to put in their kit.
Absolutely. Another question: can new artists and animators expect the number of entry level jobs in Tennessee to increase, or are we better off looking elsewhere to gain experience and get a foot in the industry?
I don't know how to answer that question because, majority of our staff, this is their first job out of college, and we are their first employer, and they're in animation, and they didn't have to go elsewhere to get a foot. So there's that. Atlanta has a really thriving market as well, and it's not far. So sure, it may be useful depending on the kind of thing you want to do. But there are a number of other productions happening here in Tennessee too. Our friends over, of course, at Lipscomb continue to work on Dead Sea Squirrels with Mike Naraki. It's a split student production and some overseas production, and so there's others too that are kind of hovering about. We actually set up, had just a number of us sitting around talking about our different efforts, and said, hey, we need to coalesce this, and so we actually started the Tennessee Animation Association. It's just a number of us that said, hey, there's a lot of us doing work in the space in different ways. Why don't we formalize this and create perhaps quarterly get-togethers where we can just sit around and talk about, hey, what are you encountering? How are you able to find talent? Where are you finding struggles in your business or your industry, and become a bit of a roundtable resource? So it's volunteer. We're all kind of putting time in on it, and so it's slowly growing. But Tennessee Animation Association will be one of those important resources to keep an eye on, particularly as we look at new productions coming in and hiring, right? So whenever we go on that side of it, our first stop is often with the Film Commission. Say, hey, who do you know? Anybody that you can help us resource with here in Tennessee that has the right skill set we need? Like I said, we just hired on a few folks just last week, and so that was through people we know, trying to say, who do we know? What's the skill set, and does it fit what we need for that role? And you just never know what that might be, right? But it's worth looking at. I think here in Tennessee, it's going to increase. We're seeing a lot of industries, like I said, of different types need these resourcing. There's a real push for these kind of volumes, LED volumes, which are really cool. And we have a couple of them here in town, one at the shop that we share our space with. And then you need CG people to create environments for those walls. So it created an instant need, right? And like I said, also in live entertainment, great, I've got a big LED wall behind my performer. What's on that wall? We got to have somebody doing that, right? So there's some kind of inadvertent creation of more business, and that could be anywhere, but it could also be in Tennessee. So yeah, I think it's going to grow.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Another question. So someone asked, "Are you hiring?" Which I'm going to augment and say, "What would a career pathway for someone who wanted to work with you or another similar studio look like?" What are you looking for, I guess, in future employees?
Yeah, so it's portfolios, and then our interview process. We're really looking for people who are on their toes and problem solvers. I think that any small business like us, where you're under 100 employees, you've just got to have people who can look to solve for themselves. We're not a large enough business where they get stuck and can sit back and kind of fold their arms. They've got to be able to engage with and help solve and move forward, and be willing to be multidisciplinary people, right? Hey, I know you had you doing this task. I'm going to move over to this task over here. That's what this world looks and feels like. Now in the larger studio, you just don't do that. So that can be a little off-putting for someone. I think that for us, LinkedIn has been a great resource. Like I mentioned, the Film Commission is always very supportive to help us. They have a nice little Rolodex of people that you can go add your name to that, add what you do, put your portfolio out there. And that listing is really useful. And we go there often to kind of see, all right, who's available, who's here in Tennessee we didn't know that has a certain skill set. that we need, right? And I think then it's just a waiting game for when that need arises, right? So we recently had a couple openings that we needed for a very particular part of our production pipeline, and found those people, which was great. And they had been talking to us for probably a year prior, saying, "Hey, I'd love to work with you. Any chance there'd be a thing?" No, not right now. But then it came up. Hey, remember that so and so that we had in our applicant folder? Let's go talk to them again. So I think this might be the right fit, and that worked out.
Very cool. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I guess the elephant in the room right now for every creative that I talk to, I was watching the news yesterday. They were talking about this, but you know, the big thing out there is the AI and what's happening with
Sure.
that across the board. They're talking about lots of companies not hiring, laying off, even across all sorts of industries. But what advice do you have for college students that are going into digital visualization or animation as the market is changing because of AI? Like, what advice would you give them coming in to this marketplace?
I think it's critical that any artist learns the tools of their age, right? Of their time, right?
Mhm.
So there was a certain time they needed to learn to use a chisel, right? There's a what's the thing in my time? I got to learn to use a chainsaw. Okay, well, I learned to use a chainsaw. What is the thing in our time? Well, uh, machine learning. AI is a fancy new term for it. Machine learning's been around a long time, though, and we all use it in different ways. It just got a rebranding that's made it very popular, right? It got a glow up, as it were, and so those of us who work in the industry are like, "Yep, it's awesome, good tool." Also, kind of the same thing we've been using. Do you remember the old Microsoft paperclip that would come out and tell you how to fix things? Remember that guy? Somebody
Yeah,
animated that
Clippy.
Clippy. I hated seeing that guy because my machine would actually slow down when he showed up. But that was a machine trying to be helpful, right? It's a version of that. We've had Siri forever. It's like we've all had the things. We've had Alexa forever. This is just a faster version of that. So the shock and awe will die. It will die soon enough. We've all talked about the AI bubble is going to pop soon because it is an iterative boost. You should learn those tools. To be ignorant of them, to say I'm going to be a hardcore independent audience, that's kind of foolish. You need to use the tools. But we firmly believe at our studio that that is a tool for artists to use. It is not to take and pile in all the work that artists have done and turn on the blender and then see what comes out. That's a version of AI that is, well, on one level, I don't think it's going to work. I think that we as humans respond to the pain of art. Art
Mhm.
costs something. If it doesn't cost me anything, I don't resonate with it, right? Steven Wilson, son of dad. I don't know if you've been paying attention. He's just a blast. I think he's in his 50s, but he's got, new artist of the year this year in his 50s, right? And he's singing these songs that are just like, yeah, working man, I feel your pain, right? AI can't do that. There's just a place that the computer can only repeat back what it's heard and learned. It doesn't know the pain of creating art. And I think
Mhm.
that I want to encourage all artists. That's going to resonate. And we're already seeing it if you hang out much with high school or college students, they're all pushing back against a lot of AI and saying, hang on, I want the organic experience. I want the tactile. I've grown up in a world of pixels and pixels are fake. There's nothing real there. I need something real, right? So live entertainment, I think, is going to continue to thrive is because it's real. You're in a room and it's sweaty and it's, awesome, right? I was just at a Cannery
Yeah.
Ballroom with it was an old, 90s rock band, and we're all like in our 50s going, we can't do the thing anymore, but this is fun, because we want that connection. So I think that
Mhm.
AI will extend our abilities, extend some reach, extend some things we can do, but it won't solve for the pain of the art that has to be created and its ability to then resonate with that audience. So it is a disruptive time, and I don't think you should be ignorant of it, but I also not afraid of it because I believe in real art doing things.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. So we're going to go into Q&A. And so what I want to do is the chat is open. You can drop your questions in there. I'm going to select questions from the chat. So if you have a question for Chris, feel free to drop it in there. We'll go through those. I'm going to prime the pump though with some questions that were submitted previously, and one that I think is perfect for you, Chris, is this one. How do you approach making an emotionally resonant story for family audiences without oversimplifying the message for young viewers?
Wow, that's strong. I grew up as a homeschool kid in the 80s where it was mostly legal in Colorado. And so, kind of, my experience was a little bit off the beaten path. And we would do family read alouds a lot. My dad would sit and read to us just various things. Little House on the Prairie, big fan. And there was something really wonderful about being, I remember being 17, coming home from work, and my dad in there with my younger siblings reading, and I'd stop and listen because the power of story works across age. And Phil Vischer and Mike Naraki, when they started VeggieTales, they had been doing puppets for their local kids' church. And what they saw was their kids sitting on the ground in front of them, but there were adults lining the back of the room, and they were just aware of both. And I think great entertainers know the value of being aware of both, right? That I'm going to make sure I'm not overshooting the little ones. I'm not going to scare them. I'm not going to make sure I'm doing the right age that I want to target, but aware that there's others in the room. And I think sometimes in kids entertainment in particular, we can dumb it down in a way that makes it a bit difficult for adults or older people to pay attention to. It's a little too grating, and that's not the kind of entertainment that I have enjoyed. It's certainly, I grew up with Pixar, so, and I think VeggieTales did the same thing of just being aware that there are adults in the room, and if I just, as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, think about that audience and even test it, like put it in front of real people sometimes to just kind of see if you're hitting it right, you can find out pretty quickly how effective you're being. If you're lower than you wanted to be, too much gaga goo goo, too much talking down, you just go, okay, let me change my language a little bit to bring in that middle school, that high schooler, to see if I can get them to pay attention by throwing in a joke they get, but these guys don't. It's that kind of thing. And that's something that I personally enjoy and love. And so it just is something that I've naturally kind of flowed into in the work that I've made.
Thank you. Another question. Are there any indicators that a story idea is strong enough to be developed into a full project or series?
Let me tell you what, this is why you want a community, because your community will tell you pretty early, is that a thing? The Jerry Seinfeld vernacular. Is that a thing? Do we have a thing here? If they're dead on you when you're pitching your story ideas and they're like, I don't get it, keep working it. It doesn't mean abandon it. I think there's a foolishness and kind of a juvenile part of us. It's like, nobody listened, I'm done. No, don't abandon it. But maybe you told it wrong. Maybe it needs to be told differently. Maybe you highlight something else. It's work the craft. I so respect stand-up comedians, right? And I actually got to hang out with Dusty Slay a number of months ago, and he's awesome. But he was talking about that. Like, the first couple times you tell those jokes, they don't work. You don't abandon the joke. You keep working it till you find the one that works, right? It's same as musicians. This song is not working, and then they keep going. Oh, the song's finally going somewhere. I think in any development, you just got to keep pitching it and finding the right different people listen to you, and then there'll be a place where they go, yeah, no, that's something. Go, keep chasing that thread, right? And it may not be your first, second, third, or even fourth idea. It's going to be something down the road. But I think people too early on can kind of latch on to an idea and kind of pitbull that thing to death. And it's like, you didn't let it breathe. That creative, it wants to find its own life and grow. You're there to serve it and kind of find its best version of itself. If you cling it to yourself and it kind of bastardizes it and says, no, it wants to be this one thing, and then it just dies on you and it doesn't go anywhere. I think that freedom to let it, if it's a good idea, it'll grow, it'll go, it'll just take off on itself.
All right, so we've got a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is from Donna. She says, from my daughter Grace, age 18, what process steps would someone take to start creating their own animated series?
Well, animated
18-year-old.
series are really hard. It's very difficult. Do a direct video or a special, even a movie. I'm now here in our fourth season. It's just, it's a lot. Series is delightful, and there are some really great ways to do those. Our friends at Minnow here in town, they're a kind of preschool young family platform. They do some really lovely work in animation as well. And I think it's really just pitching something that feels like it lives in its own space. There was years of this place called Kid Screen. It's this national or international venue where people talk about the kids market and buy and sell TV shows. And we attended every year. And you hear from them, here's what's working, here's what we're buying. We want everything with unicorns. No, it's all about trucks these days. Fire truck, give me more fire trucks. No dinosaurs, that's the thing. It's this, whatever. And there was everything has to be CG, everything's CG. Nobody wants 2D. And then Bluey happened. And Bluey happened because there was a guy in Australia who made a show for BBC that he
Yeah.
loved of his own. And then Disney brought it over to the US, and now Disney's getting all this acclaim for it. But there's a guy who just made a show that he loved. And I think
Yeah.
making anything has to come from a place of deep love and connection to it. You have to have a personal connection. It's got to be something that, like, I want this story to exist in the world. I want it to be a thing, and just keep finding ways to develop it, and then start pitching it. Right, find people that you can tell about it that are working in different fields, and they'll tell you, "Oh, I love that part of the idea," and just building it out. So that often turns into a Bible, right? So that, I don't mean that in a religious way. We have a project Bible. It's like the truth of that story, right? Um,
Mhm.
and so that will be who the characters, what's the story they're set in, and that's usually just a couple pages that tell us about what it is you're trying to create. And you can find those on the internet, different show Bibles. There's a very famous one for Stranger Things. You can find Stranger Things, to be clear, was a show that was pitched everywhere and nobody wanted it. It was dead. I thought it was a terrible idea, an 80s rehash. Nobody's going to do it. And then Netflix was their last stop in town, and they gave them a shot. Low budget, said, all right, we're going to see if this works, but we don't think it's going to work, but we're going to give you some money to go try something. And of course, global phenomenon comes out of it. I think that
Yeah.
those labors, when you're making something that you think nobody really wants, but you love it, is when some of the best moments happen. That just happened with K-pop Demon Hunters. Those guys were absolutely wanting to tell that story and couldn't find anybody that would take it out. It was this, Sony didn't really want it, Netflix didn't really want it, but they'll do it. Okay, we'll see what happens. And then it explodes, right? So you never know when the art you're working on will get a yes and maybe have an opportunity to really impact a lot of people.
You know, you mentioned earlier on your first crowdfunding, it was the proof of concept, right?
Yeah,
And so it was that short film. And I think about Bluey too, like as a series, they're 6 minute episodes. Like that's
right.
like they're very digestible, but also like that proof of concept doesn't have to be an entire series, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's your execution is not what's being judged here in those kind of proof of concepts. People get really hung up on making proof of concepts that are like pixel perfect. Like, your execution doesn't matter. I got plenty of production capacity at a lot of different places. That's not, it is, what are you trying to say? And so your execution could be pretty hand wavy, kind of like, this is what happens. But it's, if it comes together in a way that the experience of that thing is good, you're good to go. And yes, I do think crowdfunding and finding ways to do those can be well. Don't get over your skis. Raising more money than you need, and then it's just not worth it. Give yourself the resource you need to get it done, but don't go so far that you've now encumbered yourself with a bunch of money that you've got to figure out how to use and all that kind of stuff. So
Good advice. All right. Looks like our last question. Okay, so she says, Shin says, sorry I missed the beginning due to a conflict. Would you ever have a need for a Christian painter, fine gallery artist with a graffiti background who designs images digitally?
that's really
It's
fun.
very specific.
I think people's faith is so important, and I love that. I think the craft is what we pay more attention to. I get to work with a lot of people. Our faith and what we're putting into this project are very important to us, but the craft is what we talk about, right?
Mhm.
And that craft is the first and foremost. So I think that for anybody wanting to approach a show like ours or any show, look at your portfolio and see, do I have things in my portfolio, or can I do the style that they're doing? There's some brilliant artists in town who I love that we're not working with because the style isn't where we are, right? It's just,
Mhm.
it's, it's just like a band, right? I don't need
Yeah.
cowbell on this one. I need cowbell on the next one, right? But if you're a cowbell player, you're going to have on and off times, So I think that it's knowing your skill. How does it apply to that creative need? And making sure that aligns. That's the key. Sometimes that can be a little tone deaf where someone's, really skilled at something like that is incredible. I don't have anything in this current project that aligns with that need, right? So yeah, I don't know how else to say that, but if you think you've got
No.
something that feels like what we're doing, then come on.
All right. So, final question, Chris.
Yeah.
Uh, any piece of advice that you would like to give to an up and coming animator, someone that we haven't talked about, or that's something that has stuck with you outside of kind of what we've talked about, but just a final thought or a final piece of advice?
I think that so much of any storytelling comes out of our own experience. So live life. Go out and enjoy the Tennessee state parks. They're amazing. and find spaces
Yeah.
that inspire you and challenge you to the real world around us, right? I think when people get in a slump and they kind of just needs a refresher, my wife was so disciplined in this when we first moved to Tennessee. We're both from Colorado, so we're like, what does Tennessee have to offer? I would come home on Fridays, having worked virtually in pixels all day, all week long, making VeggieTales and just kind of at a computer screen. And she would have our car packed for us to go to another state park. She'd taken a map and drawn all the state parks here in Tennessee. Fall Creek Falls is our favorite. And it was brilliant to take all that thinking of creative storytelling and all the stuff we're doing and then go out and just be in God's beautiful creation and let a waterfall do something to you, and then come back with that truth inside of you again and tell it again. Right. I think that finding those rhythms for just being inspired by the world around us, go to a retirement home and be with old people and see how they see the world and experience it, and just be inspired to go create something of your own. I'm a scoutmaster. So when I walk out of here, I go spend time with a bunch of 11 to 17-year-olds hiking and backpacking and camping and getting in the mud and starting fires and all the things. And there's just something about being close to that real world of where life is lived that inspires you to go create. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview and all the insights that you've shared today.
Well, and again, I have to say thank you, Arts Business Council, for being such an important help for me in my journey. It means a ton. I'm so glad to give back because those days were tough and scary, and I wasn't sure how I was going to get out of it. And you guys were there. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And glad that we were able to play that role because that's what we do. And that's what we are here for, is to help artists when they need us the most.